Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the absolute core of human society, the rules that govern us. Have you ever actually stopped to think about what our daily lives would look like if there were literally no laws, no rules governing our behavior? It's a completely fascinating and honestly, maybe a slightly terrifying concept to explore.
To guide our journey today, here's a quick roadmap. 1. Why do we need law? 2. What exactly is law? 3. When laws and morals clash. 4. Is the law always just? And finally, 5. The illusion of certainty. Let's get right into it.
So, Section 1. Why do we need law?
If we look at the Western social contract approach, we see this really stark contrast between two highly influential 17th century philosophers. On one hand, we've got Thomas Hobbes. He basically believed that law was born strictly from a fear of mutual destruction. He argued that in our natural state, without any rules, people would simply destroy each other. So to avoid that terrifying reality, we willingly surrender our unlimited freedom. Now on the flip side, we have John Locke, who saw the law as a rational tool to resolve conflict. Locke was a lot more optimistic. He believed humans are naturally governed by reason. But recognizing that life is uncertain and conflicts are totally inevitable, he thought people rationally choose to submit to the authority of a state just to maintain the peace.
But if we shift our focus to the African perspective, that whole individualistic social contract idea basically disappears. Instead, it's replaced by Ubuntu. This is an inherent community interconnectedness where we are born into ethical obligations. Here, you aren't entering into some fictitious contract with strangers just to avoid chaos. Instead, human beings are born into a world where we already owe duties to others, and they owe duties to us. I am because you are. You can literally never truly separate yourself from your community.
And what's really amazing here is how South African courts actually use this ancient philosophy today to create new legal remedies and foster human dignity, exactly as we see in the Landmark Mokwanyane case. This isn't just some abstract theory we're talking about. Judges are actively infusing the core values of Ubuntu right into modern jurisprudence to recognize a person's unconditional entitlement to respect and acceptance from their community. It's really a beautiful concept.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, what exactly is law?
Well, at its core, the law is essentially a set of norms regulating society, and it's maintained by these three distinct pillars of government all working together. First, you have the legislator, like Parliament, which actually creates the laws. Then the executive branch, which includes the police and prison authorities who are tasked with enforcing those laws. And finally, the judiciary, the courts, which interprets and applies those laws to specific real-world situations. However, we have to remember that the law isn't just some lifeless mechanical machine. It is heavily driven by core societal values: economic, political, social, and moral. If the law fails to reflect those values, as it tragically did during apartheid, it faces a massive legitimacy crisis. Think about it. In a functioning democracy, the rules absolutely must reflect the cultural beliefs and values of the people being governed. Because when a massive gap opens up between what the law dictates and what society actually values, the entire legal system risks collapsing entirely under its own illegitimacy.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, when laws and morals clash. This is where things get really fascinating. We have to ask ourselves, how does a society balance the rigid rules of the state against deeply held religious, ethical, and community norms? I mean, every religion has a code, right? And every single person has their own internal moral compass. Sometimes these align perfectly with the law, like how both religion and the state generally forbid murder. But what actually happens when your religion or your personal conscience demands something that the law expressly forbids?
Well, let's look at the Ahmad case from 1999. Here we see this really beautiful resolution where the law actually adapted to recognize Muslim marriages, proving that legal and religious norms can, in fact, harmonize to protect vulnerable people. See, before this case, if a Muslim husband died in a car accident, his widow couldn't legally claim a loss of maintenance simply because the state didn't officially recognize her religious marriage. But the court thankfully changed this, embracing a much-needed new ethos of tolerance and pluralism.
Conversely, though, the 2004 Christian education case shows us a very strict boundary. When religious instruction allowing corporal punishment clashed directly with the child's constitutional right to bodily integrity, the court ruled that human dignity absolutely must prevail. In this instance, the group argued that their biblical instruction allowed for the physical disciplining of children, but the Constitutional Court drew a hard line in the sand, stating that a child's best interest and bodily integrity are simply more important than that specific exercise of religious freedom.
Now, this incredible juxtaposition of the two Prince cases shows us just how much the law can evolve over time. What was considered a totally justified restriction on Rastafarian religious freedom back in 2002 was actually overturned in 2018 when the court ruled that banning private cannabis use violated the right to privacy. Back in 2002, Mr. Prince literally had to choose between his religion, which used cannabis for observance, and his legal career, because the court said the ban was justified due to policing difficulties. But flash forward 16 years, leveraging modern medical evidence that cannabis is arguably less harmful than alcohol, the Constitutional Court struck down the legislation for private, adult personal use. The law actively changed because the legal framework shifted from religious freedom over to personal privacy, a real game changer.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that the law can be highly paternalistic, and honestly, it sometimes just flat out ignores popular public sentiment. We saw this incredibly clearly when the Constitutional Court abolished the death penalty, totally regardless of widespread public support for it. The court essentially acts like a parent protecting its citizens. In that Makwanyana case, Judge Chaskolson openly admitted that the majority of the public probably supported the death penalty for extreme murder, but he made it crystal clear, the court's job isn't to just follow public opinion. Its job is to uphold the Constitution without fear or favor.
This leads us right into Section 4. Is the law always just? To even begin to answer that, we actually need to split the concept of justice in two. We have to contrast the strict procedural rules of the court against the substantive fairness of the law's actual content. Okay, so procedural justice, that's the how. That ensures the rules of the game are followed correctly, like making sure the police actually get a warrant before searching your car. But substantive justice, that looks at the what, the rule itself. Is the actual definition of the crime fair? Because as you can imagine, you can easily have a situation where the procedures are followed absolutely perfectly, but the underlying law itself is incredibly unjust.
And this exact tension sets the stage for a massive philosophical debate between legal positivism and natural law. Legal positivism strictly enforces the law exactly as it is written, meaning morality is basically irrelevant, while natural law argues that an unjust rule is not truly a law at all. It must follow a higher moral code. Positivist lawyers believe morality and law are completely separate entities. If Parliament passes a law, judges must enforce it no matter how cruel it might be. We saw this devastating reality during apartheid, where judges felt totally bound by parliamentary sovereignty to enforce racist legislation. But natural law pushes back against this completely, arguing that laws must align with human reason and a higher moral dimension, otherwise they literally lose their validity.
And finally, Section 5, the illusion of certainty. You know, we desperately want the law to be certain and predictable. We really rely on the legal principle of stare decisis to guarantee that similar cases get similar outcomes. It gives society a much-needed sense of stability. Think about it. If someone gets a specific fine for speeding today, we absolutely want to know that someone doing the exact same thing tomorrow will get the exact same fine, right?
However, as we start to wrap up this explainer, we can see that absolute certainty is kind of a complete illusion. Why? Well, because the system relies on ambiguous language, constantly shifting human values, and the subjective minds of judges. Laws are, at the end of the day, written in words, and words almost never have just one simple fixed meaning. Plus, society and technology are constantly evolving, meaning the law is literally always playing catch-up. And finally, judges are human beings. They have to exercise their own subjective discretion to interpret all these moving parts.
Because judges have this discretion, they are constantly caught in a tug-of-war between judicial activism, actively bending the law to create social change, and judicial deference, passively deferring to the government's written statutes. An activist judge might look at an old law and interpret its language creatively to protect a newly recognized human right, while a deferential judge will look at that exact same law and say, hey, it's not my place to change this. If society wants a new rule, Parliament needs to write a new statute.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. In your ideal society, do you want a legal system governed by judges who enforce the law exactly as it is written for absolute certainty, or those who actively bend it in the unpredictable, messy pursuit of true justice? Because if we demand absolute predictability, we run the risk of enforcing deeply unjust laws. But if we allow judges the freedom to constantly bend the law toward their subjective view of justice, we might lose the very predictability that holds our society together. It's a profound balancing act. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really hope this leaves you looking at the rules governing our world in a totally new light.